Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. Azerbaijan says it has liberated the Fuzuli city in the Karabakh region from the Armenian occupation. In a state address, President Ilham Aliyev said Azeri forces have also retaken control of 7 villages in the region. Earlier, Azerbaijan said 12 civilians were killed and 40 wounded in an Armenian missile strike on Ganja city. Indian troops have martyred another civilian in occupied Kashmir's Islamabad district. The occupying troops targeted the youth during a cordon and search operation in Lano area of the district. The occupied valley has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 439 days. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's Labour Party has won a landslide victory in New Zealand's general election. Electoral Commission says Labour Party has won 49% of the votes, far ahead of the National Party's 27%. It says Labour Party is on track to win 64 of the 120 seats in the country's unicameral parliament. The mandate means Ardern could form the first single-party government in decades. India has recorded 837 COVID-19 deaths and over 62,000 infections overnight as the country's caseload topped 7.4 million. Brazil has registered 754 deaths since yesterday, with the toll crossing 153,000. In Pakistan, 13 people have died from the virus overnight, taking the death tally to 6,638. While globally, coronavirus has claimed over 1.1 million lives and infected over 39 million people so far. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. Azerbaijan says it has liberated the Fuzuli city in the Karabakh region from the Armenian occupation. President Ilham Aliyev said Azeri forces have retaken the control of 7 villages in the district.
In a televised address, President congratulated his people, saying Karabakh is Azerbaijan. He also stated Azerbaijan will never attack civilians and will answer Armenia on the battlefield. This comes after Azerbaijan reported 13 civilian casualties in an Armenian missile attack on Ganja city. Azeri Foreign Policy Affairs head Hikmat Hajiev said 40 others were wounded in the attack. He said targeting densely populated civilian areas shows complete immorality of Armenian leadership. Hajiev said it is a sign of weakness and desperation of Armenia in the face of its defeat on the battleground. Meanwhile, Azeri Defense Ministry said its forces have destroyed Armenia's Su-25 aircraft, which was attempting to attack the Jabrail city. More than 600 people have been killed since the war on the Nagorno-Karabakh region started on September 27.
Now, Indian troops have martyred another civilian in occupied Jammu and Kashmir's Islamabad district. The occupying troops targeted the youth during a cordon and search operation in the Lano area of the district. The military crackdown in the area is still underway. Earlier, Pakistan's Foreign Office strongly condemned India's aggression against civilians in the occupied valley. In a press briefing, spokesperson Zahid Hafiz said Indian forces have martyred more than 300 Kashmiris in a year. The occupied valley has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 439 days. Now, India's major political party, the Congress, has called for the restoration of occupied Jammu and Kashmir's special status. In a tweet, former Home Minister Palyanappan Chidambaram said the arbitrary and unconstitutional decisions of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government must be rescinded. Details about India's unconstitutional actions in this report. The occupied valley's plight started on 26th of October 1947, when India claimed to have signed Instrument of Accession on that day with the Maharaja of Kashmir. Professor Christopher Snedden writes, large parts of the valley had declared independence from Hari Singh's oppressive rule. Snedden says Singh had no legal capacity under international law to sign the document, as he had lost effective control of the state in the presence of an outstanding standstill agreement between Pakistan and Singh. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office and US State Department also affirmed the instrument could not come into effect. The United Nations does not consider Indian claims as valid and recognizes Kashmir as a disputed territory. United Nations Security Council resolutions categorically denounce the permanent accession of the valley via the instrument. It conditions the future political status of the valley on the outcome of free, fair and impartial plebiscite. Last year, on 5th August, New Delhi revoked Article 370. The article allowed the state of Muslim majority a certain amount of autonomy, its own constitution, separate flag and freedom to make laws. According to the Indian Constitution, Article 370 could only be modified with the agreement of the state government. The Modi government's illegal decision aggravated the situation in the occupied territory ever since Jammu and Kashmir has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout. Well, now for more on this, we are joined by Daniel Hassan, a regional political analyst. Sir, thank you for your time, Daniel. Now, Indian brutalities have intensified in occupied Kashmir, especially after the revocation of Article 370. So what does New Delhi want to achieve with this violence?
Well, the government of India has gotten itself into a very tight spot, and it is left with not many options at the moment, because since it imposed a lockdown on August 5th in the illegally occupied region of Jammu and Kashmir on August the 5th, 2019. Right now, there's only so much they can do. They've imposed a curfew. They've already imposed a lockdown for more than a year, and now the people are fed up. And the moment the curfew is lifted and the lockdown ends, there is going to be a public outcry in the illegally occupied region of Jammu and Kashmir. And that is why the Indian government is trying to counter what it is foreseeing in the coming days through violence throughout the country, and especially in major cities.
Right, Daniel, India's main opposition party, Congress, has asked Prime Minister Modi's government to restore the Article 370 and give Kashmiris their right. So how does New Delhi respond to this demand?
Well, as a student of law, I believe that the revocation of Article 370 in the first place was illegal and unconstitutional. And the same has also been challenged before the Indian Supreme Court. But as a political move, it would be very difficult for the government in New Delhi to move away from the hard position that it has taken. And I don't think it would succumb to the demands being made by the Congress party so easily. The revocation of Article 370 can very well be dispensed with, and it can be reversed. But for that, Congress would have to do more than making a simple demand from the central government in New Delhi.
Right, Daniel Hassan, thank you for talking to Indus. Now, also, we have been joined by legal expert on Kashmir, Mr. Taimur Malik. Thank you for your time, Taimur. Now, the disgruntled political parties in the occupied valley have joined hands to put up a joint front against New Delhi. How will India respond to this stronger alliance after revoking Article 370?
First of all, we need to keep it in mind that Article 370 was abrogated by India recently. But in effect, through about 47 presidential orders spanning a 50-year period, India had systematically extended most provisions of the Indian Constitution to Jammu and Kashmir and taken away its special status that was supposed to be there as per the Indian Constitution and India's international commitments. So in view of that, it won't be surprising if India was to come up with further illegal act to justify clamping down on this new coalition of political parties in the IIO-JK.
Right, Taimur, the Indian government has also detained most of the Kashmiri leadership. On what legal basis New Delhi can confine them indefinitely?
Well, there is no legal basis which would be deemed legal by most of the civilized world. In this particular scenario, India has been using some very draconian local laws, such as the Public Safety Act, in order to detain people indefinitely on grounds that their detention is necessary for ensuring public safety. Now, such laws are not going to be considered to be legal in most parts of the world. In the Indian scenario, we expect them to use such laws and other powers that are available under their domestic laws to the Indian armed forces to continue to detain political leaders as they did immediately before the abrogation of Article 370 and 35A. And then leaders such as Mehbooba Mufti were in detention just till earlier this week.
Right, Taimur Malik, thank you for talking to Indus News. Now, moving on with other stories, the European Union has imposed targeted restrictive measures on 7 recently appointed ministers in Syria. In a statement, the European Council said the curbs were imposed of violent repression against Syria's civil population. It said the sanctions will include a travel ban on ministers and freeze their assets as well. The statement said with the recent move, 280 people have become subjected to European Union sanctions. It said the European Union remains committed to finding a lasting political solution to the Syrian conflict under international law. Now, the Council keeps developments in the Syrian conflict under constant review. Any decision to prolong the sanctions is for the Council to take on an annual basis. Now, Israel has stopped issuing visas to United Nations human rights workers in Palestine. This forced 9 employees of the Office of the UN High Commission for Human Rights to leave Israel and the occupied territories. In February, Israel suspended its ties with the UN agency after it unveiled a list of companies working in illegal settlements in the West Bank. Human Rights Watch says such steps are part of a strategy to muzzle documentations of Israel's repressions of the Palestinians. The rights group said Israel has failed in its goal of silencing criticism as activists are working as strongly as before. Israel also banned a Palestinian pop star from returning home after he released a video calling for resistance against Tel Aviv. Meanwhile, a U.S. delegation led by Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin will travel to Israel, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. The visit comes in support of recently signed normalization deals between Israel and 2 other Arab countries. In a statement, the Treasury Department said the 3-day visit is aimed at supporting expanded economic cooperation. It added the delegation will join Israeli officials on the first ever direct commercial flight from Israel to Bahrain. The statement read, the group will then fly to Abu Dhabi, where the first ever Abraham Accords Business Summit will be held. The Treasury Department said the US and Israeli delegation will then fly back to Tel Aviv. Now, Yemen's warring parties have exchanged hundreds more prisoners under a deal struck in Switzerland last month. Planes took off from the Yemeni airport on the second and final day of an operation to fly about 1,000 men home. Welcoming the release, the International Committee of the Red Cross said over 1,000 prisoners were returned home. It said 352 prisoners were exchanged today after more than 700 were swapped yesterday. The warring sides had agreed in 2018 to swap 15,000 detainees split between both sides to pave the way for political negotiations. Yemen has been at war since the Houthi rebels ousted the government from power in Sana'a in late 2014. Moving on now, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says Ankara will never recognize the annexation of Crimea. He says Turkey supports Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity and political unity. In a joint news conference with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Ankara, Erdogan said ties with Kiev can be enhanced in many fields through a win-win approach. He said Turkey sees Ukraine as an important country to establish peace and security in the region. Erdogan said the 2 sides are committed to make free trade deals and boost bilateral trade volume to $10 billion. Zelensky said Turkey and Ukraine have signed an MOU on technical and military cooperation. He stressed Kiev is ready to further enhance the strategic partnership with Ankara. Now, the US says there are reports that Turkey has fired a missile to test its Russian-made S-400 defense system. The State Department says there will be potentially serious consequences if Turkey activated its S-400 system. The State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus said Washington condemns Ankara's missile test launch. She said it's incompatible with Ankara's responsibilities as a NATO ally and strategic partners of the U.S. The Pentagon says the S-400 should not be activated. A Pentagon spokesperson said Turkey has already been suspended from the F-35 program. It said the S-400 continues to be a barrier to progress elsewhere in the bilateral relationship. Turkey's defense ministry says it will neither deny nor confirm the missile tests. Meanwhile, the United States rejected Russia's proposal for a one-year unconditional extension of the New START arms control treaty. U.S. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien said Washington cannot accept the proposal, with Russia not freezing nuclear warheads. In a series of tweets, he said the United States hopes Russia will re-evaluate its position before a costly arms race ensues. Earlier, Russian President Vladimir Putin said the treaty must be extended without conditions before it's too late.
Regrettable if the treaty disappeared and was not replaced by another similar fundamental document. In the past, the New START treaty worked. It worked well, fulfilling its fundamental role as a constraint, curbing the arms race and controlling weapons. It's clear we have new weapon systems that the Americans don't have. For the moment, in any case, we're open to discuss this issue as well.
Well, it's time for a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, despite police crackdowns, hundreds of Thais rally across Bangkok defying a government ban on gatherings. For the last 3 months, protesters have been calling for the resignation of Prime Minister and a reduction in the King's powers. In a statement, the People's Movement vowed to continue the protest. Condemning police violence, the movement urged people to be ready for what it called suppression tactics. Earlier, violent scuffles broke out between Thai police and anti-government protesters. The police have arrested more than 50 people, including protest leaders, in the past week. In a news conference, a police spokesperson said, violent or not, all gatherings are illegal. Meanwhile, a government spokesperson says there is no win or lose for any side, as it's all damage to the country. Now, India has recorded 837 COVID-19 deaths and over 62,000 infections overnight, as the country's caseload topped 7.4 million. Brazil has registered 754 deaths since yesterday, with a toll crossing 153,000. Globally, coronavirus has claimed over 1.1 million lives and infected over 39 million people so far. More details in this report.
The second wave of COVID-19 continues to exert pressure on Europe. Germany, Greece and Slovenia set new records of infections just a day after Italy, Portugal and Lithuania hit their single-day highs. The governments continue to impose stricter restrictions across the continent to contain the virus. In Belgium, hospitals risk running out of beds as infections soar and the country imposes new curbs.
Restaurants and cafes will have to close for a period of 1 month. There will be an evaluation in 2 weeks, and there will also be a large-scale support package to help cafes and restaurants to help them through this clearly very difficult time. The sale of alcohol will be prohibited after 8 p.m. There will be a curfew between midnight and 5 a.m.
Only 5 countries, including Brazil, Argentina and Mexico, account for 80% of the Latin America's COVID-19 infections. The pandemic has not only devastated the region's economies, but also put a huge strain on its social and cultural lives. Mexico's indigenous people face uncertainties as COVID-19 stems the annual tradition of visiting cemeteries on the Day of Dead.
Right now we planted 50% of what we plant every year because we have suffered because of the plants that we've been left with that we had to throw out. There have been many losses this year.
The situation in India remains grim as the country continues to witness world's highest number of daily deaths. Meanwhile, the Chinese mainland reported 13 new imported cases in the past 24 hours.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 13 more people have lost their lives to COVID-19 during the last 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the countrywide death toll has risen to 6,638. The ministry added 641 people tested positive overnight. It said there are 9,174 active COVID-19 cases in the country. The ministry added out of nearly 322,000 cases, over 306,000 have recovered so far. It said more than 141,000 cases have been detected in the southern province of Sindh, while Punjab has reported some 101,000 cases. Now moving to the United Kingdom, where a London court has ordered to immediately freeze all 6 trust properties controlled by the MQM founder Altaf Hussain. This includes the palatial house in West London, where Hussain currently resides with his bodyguards. The freezing order says Hussain and his associates can stay in the properties pending the outcome of the case. The case was brought up by the MQM Pakistan, claiming to be the beneficial owner of these properties. Under the court order, the properties cannot be sold. The court also made an order for costs against the MQM UK on part of the case, which is yet to be assessed. The court did not give an order to the MQM Pakistan on the monthly rent. These properties are valued at more than $19 million. Now, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's Labour Party has won a landslide victory in New Zealand's general election. The Electoral Commission says Labour Party has won 49% of the vote, far ahead of the National Party's 27%. It says Labour Party is on track to win 64 of the 120 seats in the country's unicameral parliament. It will be the highest seats won by any party since New Zealand adopted a proportional voting system in 1996. Ardern came out of her home in Auckland to celebrate her victory with her supporters. Opposition National Party leader Judith Collins congratulated Ardern on an outstanding result. New Zealanders have also voted on referendums to legalise euthanasia and recreational marijuana. The results of the referendum will be announced on the 30th of October. Now, US President Donald Trump and his Democratic rival Joe Biden campaign in key battlegrounds amid early voting surge. The two candidates are focused on closely fought states expected to determine the winner of November 3rd presidential election. More details in this report.
More than 22 million Americans have voted so far, either in person or by mail, according to the U.S. Election Project. Trump, who lags in opinion polls, is also behind Biden in fundraising. Addressing a crowd of seniors in Florida, the president expressed empathy for those who lost family members to COVID-19. Recently recovered from the disease himself, Trump said he felt their anguish.
My heart breaks for every grieving family that has lost a precious loved one. I feel their anguish and I mourn their loss. I feel their pain. I know that the terrible pain that they have gone through, and you lose someone and there's nothing to describe.
Just weeks ahead of the election, the vote has centered not only to the president's handling of the pandemic, but on the healthcare as well. Joe Biden has shown strength with senior voters who blame Trump for the increase in COVID-19 cases. He has lambasted the president for downplaying the severity of the crisis and seeking to dismantle Affordable Care Act. Speaking at an event in Michigan, Biden vowed to build on the act if he became the president.
If I have the honor of becoming your president, we'll build on the Affordable Care Act, no matter what they do. You can choose to keep a private plan if you still have one, because some of the private plans negotiated with the UFW and others are good plans. But we'll also offer you a Medicare-like public health insurance option. It'll force private insurers to keep premiums low and offer better coverage because it's for the first time they'll have to compete for your business against a public insurer that doesn't have the profit motive in mind.
Reports indicate registered Democrats have so far outvoted registered Republicans, casting more than double the number of ballots. Of this early voting Democrats, women and Black Americans are in particularly high number.
Well, child malnutrition remains a prevalent challenge in developing countries across the world, but Pakistan has allocated around $56 million to its Ehsaas Nasho-Numa program to tackle the issue in the country. More in this report by our correspondent Manahil Ahmed from Islamabad.
Pakistan treads forward as it takes extensive measures and initiatives in prioritizing health and social care. UNICEF Nutrient Officer Dr. Sabah Shuja says the UNICEF mandate is supporting the government in providing a well-nourished community.
UNICEF is there to support government of Pakistan at the federal level, at the provincial level, and at the regional level. So since UNICEF mandate is with the children, so obviously we are working toward the improvement of malnutrition, status, and to provide a well-nourished, population to this country.
Special Assistant to Prime Minister on Poverty Alleviation and Social Safety, Dr. Sania Nishtar said the government has set a direction on how to interplay.
One decision the federal government took was that it will coordinate high-level policy to make sure that there's no fragmentation, there are no duplications, that the appropriate synergies are being exploited, there are no missing areas. To push the needle further on that, we created the National Nutrition Council. So that's the highest coordinating body on nutrition within the country.
With the Asas Nashanoma program, Dr. Nishtar is hopeful that the government will be able to reduce stunting by 8%.
It's been rolled out in 9 districts of the country. And in those 9 districts, we've set up 35 centers. The program is budgeted in such a way that we plan to reach out to 250,000 families. And the idea is that the outcome of interest is that the prevalence of stunting should be reduced by around 8%.
To create awareness in rural areas, special charts, posters, and informative videos on food and hygiene have been compiled. These will not only help educate the woman, but will go a long way in eradicating malnutrition. Reporting for Indus News, Manahil Ahmed, Islamabad.
Now, the World Bank says it must push ahead with efforts to deliver $160 billion in coronavirus aid by June 2021. In a communique, a joint development committee said the World Bank and International Monetary Fund must provide debt relief to developing countries. The committee urged IMF to deploy all available tools and resources to help member states from the crisis. It said IMF provided $100 billion in assistance to over 80 countries during the pandemic so far. Earlier, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin warned the World Bank to manage its financial resources transparently. He said banks should prioritize funds for poor countries with the greatest needs. Now, China says it has reached a consensus with the Philippines on energy projects in the South China Sea. In a statement, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said the two countries will build a consortium mechanism. He said China hopes the two sides can promote positive progress in the joint development of energy. Earlier, Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte lifted a moratorium on South China Sea exploration projects. The moratorium was imposed in 2014 due to a territorial dispute with Beijing, which Manila won in 2016. And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. Well, that is all for now. For the latest update, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.